Imagine being Kaiser Wilhelm II in 1917. Your breakfast tastes like actual cardboard. Your soldiers have been eating nothing but boiled turnips for months. And your glorious, unstoppable war machine is completely stuck in the mud. You are stressed, you are tired, and you are desperately looking for an exit strategy. Then, out of nowhere, a literal miracle drops from the sky. Russia, that massive, angry, sleeping giant to the east, decides to completely implode. Vladimir Lenin arrives in a train. The Tsar is politely but firmly kicked off his throne, and the new Russian leaders sign a separate peace treaty, basically telling the world, you know what, we're out. Good luck with the rest of this nightmare. For Germany, this is the best day in human history. They can finally pack up 1 million battle-hardened soldiers from the Eastern Front and ship them straight to France to crush the British and the French once and for all. But let's pause the tape right there and play a little game. What if that million-man Russian army, instead of dropping their rifles to go home and start a communist revolution, had looked at their generals and said, you know what, we've been freezing here for 3 years. We're already dirty. Let's just finish the job. I'll tell you what happens. It completely obliterates the timeline we know, rewrites every single border on the modern map, and traps Germany in the biggest, most desperate geopolitical vice in military history. If the Russian provisional government had managed to find enough boots, bread, and morale to hold that Eastern Front together for just 6 more months, the Central Powers would have collapsed like a house of cards. In our actual history, Germany had a perfect, beautiful window of opportunity. Because Russia quit early, the German High Command could launch a massive, desperate final offensive in France before the Americans could arrive in full force. It almost worked. But if Russia stays in the game, well, that beautiful window is slammed shut and locked from the inside. That million-man German army cannot move an inch. They stay right there, freezing their toes off in the muddy trenches of Western Russia, while the generals in Berlin start sweating absolute bullets. Cold, terrified, panicked bullets. At that point, Germany's strategic situation becomes a literal comedy of errors. Picture the scene on the world map. In the west, the Atlantic Ocean is basically an assembly line of ships arriving packed to the brim with fresh, overfed, heavily armed American doughboys who are actually excited to fight. In the east, the Russian army, despite being hungry and chaotic, keeps pushing forward like a giant, relentless steamroller that refuses to die. And down south, Austria-Hungary, an empire that was already held together by nothing but duct tape, old traditions, and pure optimism, simply shatters into 3 seconds flat. Germany suddenly finds itself completely alone, surrounded on all sides, out of rubber, out of oil, out of food, and forced to fight a massive two-front war with absolutely nothing left in the tank. The war wouldn't have dragged on into late 1918. It would have been over way sooner. We're talking early 1918, or even the final snowy months of 1917, ending with a total, unconditional, and deeply humiliating German surrender. And this is where the alternate history timeline gets incredibly juicy. Let's take a look at the peace conference table. In our history, Russia didn't get a single penny or a single inch of land at Versailles because they quit the war early and became a communist pariah. But in this universe, the Russian delegates show up to the party wearing their finest suits, with massive smiles on their faces and a terrifyingly long shopping list. They want Poland. They want massive chunks of Eastern Germany. And most importantly, they finally get their holy grail: control over Constantinople and the Black Sea Straits, effectively deleting the Ottoman Empire from the map of the world. Russia instantly becomes a dominant naval superpower with direct, unhindered access to the Mediterranean Sea. But the real, massive atomic bomb of this timeline is what doesn't happen. no collapse of the Russian Empire means absolutely no Soviet Union. Just think about the sheer scale of that change. Without the chaotic misery of a prolonged losing war, Lenin's Bolsheviks never get their big break. They remain just a bunch of angry radicals shouting at each other in Swiss cafes, completely ignored by history. No Joseph Stalin, no Cold War, no Cuban Missile Crisis, no space race, and no Berlin Wall. Instead of a tense communist bloc threatening the West, the 20th century would have seen a massive, wealthy, and hyper-powerful Russian democracy, or perhaps a stable constitutional monarchy completely integrated into the European economy. Of course, it wouldn't be a perfect utopia. A Russia that massive, stretching from the borders of Germany all the way to the Pacific Ocean, would have given Great Britain and the United States a massive collective panic attack. The balance of power would be completely ruined. The Second World War probably wouldn't have featured a fascist Germany at all. Instead, the mid-20th century would have been a titanic, slow-burning diplomatic and military showdown between the British Empire and the Russian Colossus for the ultimate control of Asia. So, basically, if Russia hadn't quit the war in 1917, we'd be living in a world without communism, with a completely unrecognizable European map. And honestly, we'd probably all have to learn a little bit of Russian in middle school. But hey, look on the bright side. At least we all would have been spared the absolute mind-numbing boredom of studying the Cuban Missile Crisis in history class.